Hello all you whiskey nuts out there. This is Mark from WhiskyWhistle.com bringing you whiskey review number 8. First of all, thanks a lot for all the great comments and the subscribers who have, subscribed to Whiskey Whistle. I really appreciate that. And, with us today is Jura. Jura is a Scottish single malt whiskey, a Scotch single malt whiskey. It is from the Isle of Jura, so that's actually the name of the island, which is very close to Islay, in fact. There's perhaps some relationship in the quality and the essence of the whiskey, just because of where it's from. More on that shortly. Jura. This is my first ever bottle that I've ever bought of Jura. I did try it once before, but decided to, splash out on this bottle. This is a special bottling, and, you would have a hard time finding it, except perhaps in a boutique or a fine whiskey shop. You might still be able to find a bottle of that. I'll bring that close to you. That's called Jura Boutique Barrels. And this is the 1993 edition. So they've actually sort of made a vintage, releasing it year by year. Well, on particular years, not every year. Good things here. This says, first of all, Jura Boutique Barrels from the Isle of Jura, single malt Scotch whiskey, single cask bottling. Although we don't know what cask it is, in fact. Non-chill filtered. That is fantastic news, isn't it? Oloroso sherry butts, bottled at cask strength. Sherry J.I. cask finish, vintage Scotch whiskey, 1993, 54%. Date distilled 21/01/93. 70 centiliters, and I'll repeat that ABV. It's 54%. Or 108 proof on the American system. So quite the whopping alcohol content, isn't it? Now, a little bit about Jura, the distillery. It's actually a very old distillery with a long history. First of all, it was established in 1810, built by the Campbell family. Not much is known. Before that, apparently on the Isle of Jura, home distilling was okay. It was legal. And then at some point towards the end of the 17th century, it became illegal. And then I guess because of that, I guess the distillery was founded. And for about 70 years it operated, or however many years, and then it was rebuilt apparently in 1884. And then dismantled in the early 1900s. And then there was nothing heard from the Jura Distillery for years and years. Apparently in the 1950s, the people of the Isle of Jura began talking about the idea of rebuilding the great distillery, and then finally it was reopened in 1963. I mentioned there was a relationship with Islay whiskies in the style. So apparently formerly it was quite heavily peated, since it reopened, they've sort of adopted the Highland flavor and format of the whiskey. So it's a little bit less peaty. In fact, it is a Highland single malt. I should say Highland. I shouldn't say Highland. But in fact, many would call it an Islands single malt whiskey. Again, it's a new distinction. The islands are in fact part of the Highland region, but the style of these whiskeys is a little bit different. So probably at some point the Scotch Whisky Association will allow a separate region to be created. An official region is what I mean. Anyway, what about the ownership? So I guess it would have started out independent in the 1960s. And recently White and Mackay, which are in fact a bottler, they purchased the distillery. And White and Mackay in turn was purchased by the Philippine conglomerate called Emperador. So interesting connection there to Asia. Well, what else? So the 1993 Boutique Barrel Sherry Cask, this one is quite interesting. So 1993 they put the new make spirit into white American oak casks. So those would have had some previous bourbon content in that. They're not virgin oak. Okay, so they've got previous content of bourbon in there. And there they sat for 9 years until 2002. Then what they did was they dumped the whiskey. It can be called a whiskey after just 3 years. So they dumped the whiskey from these white American oak casks into Oloroso Paseda sherry butts. I think that's the right pronunciation. I'm not sure. Anyway, sherry butts. These are much larger vessels than the bourbon casks. So they could be as big as 600 liters. And in fact, by Scottish law, the size of the cask must not exceed 700 liters, I believe. I could be wrong. It might be 600, but I think it's 700. Anyway, for 8 more years. So in total, this is a 17-year-old Isle of Jura single malt Scotch whiskey. And in fact, it doesn't say that it's 17 years old on here. It should say that. You have to kind of do some research to find out exactly when they bottled. But anyway, it's regarded as a 17-year-old. So it's got some age. It's got some age to it. So that is well, that'll be different. Until now, most of the whiskeys that I've done have been a little bit younger. 15 was the oldest one I did with Glenfiddich. That was review number 6, I believe. Anyway, so it's unchill filtered. It has not had any filtration at a low temperature. So that preserves some of the fatty acids and the proteins to remain in there, which carry a lot of the flavor. If you wonder why bacon is so good, part of the reason is the smoky flavors are locked inside the fat. So fat is a good way to carry flavor. So it's best if we leave it there. Anyway, of course, what ends up happening though is when you lower the ABV in an unchill filtered whiskey below 46 at room temperature, you will start to see some Scotch mist, or kind of a cloudy appearance, kind of like Hogarden whiskey is Hogarden whiskey. That would be good. Hogarden beer, as I mentioned before. Anyway, is it a natural color? Well, I do hope so. Given the fact that it's spent 8 years in sherry casks, Oloroso casks, you would expect that this would be the natural color. And it does have that bright orange hue to it. Now, in any other whiskey, I would say this has definitely had color added. This one, we don't know. But if it were naturally colored, they would likely state it on the bottle. Anyway, enough about that. Let's have a brief look at some photos together. So that's a map of Scotland, and Jura is right about there. And here you can see, here's Islay, and Jura right next door. So one step closer to the mainland. And here's the distillery itself. It's quite a gorgeous looking building, in fact. Probably a beautiful place to visit. Here are the stills inside, 4 of them, I think. They may have increased those by now, who knows? Quite tall too. And this is Willie Cochran. And well, he's the man behind Jura and making a lot of the decisions. And there's the bottle that we're working with right now. Okay, anyway, I've got a glass here that I poured earlier. We should let the whiskey sit a little while if it's got some age behind it especially. But let's pour a new glass and we'll compare them. Not too much. This is quite strong. That should be good. It's about 20 milliliters, I'd say. And you know, when you open the cork, you can smell it right away. This is a very, very perfumed, strongly scented, wonderful whiskey. And right off the bat, you get some sherry notes. If you haven't had sherry before, I suggest you try. You may have had port, which is not entirely dissimilar. Port is from Portugal, sherry is from Spain, and they're both fortified wines. So the wine has distilled spirits added to it. That's called the fortification. Anyway, yes, lots of sherry notes, and these are dried fruits especially. There's also some orange in there, and again, since it's from the Isle of Jura, which is near Isla, and the water there is of a peated variety. So even if they don't peat the malted barley, you get a peated bit of flavor coming through. So there's a little bit of peat coming through the glass here, but it's very mild. 9 years in American oak casks. You can also smell some of the bourbon notes, the vanillas, the caramels, and a bit of oak. And it's spicy. And sweet, and there's some sort of a berry sugar note there, especially the longer you sit with it. Now, I just want to compare that with the one I poured about half an hour ago. Clear my nose a little bit. And you get a rich raisin caramel sort of a wonderful flavor going on there. And stick candy or cane candy, not peppermint, not candy canes, you know, the Christmas ones, but the ones of other flavors. When you open up the glass at the candy shop and you take a whiff. And I noticed a little bit more caramel and vanilla notes in the one that was poured earlier. Anyway, cheers. See if I can cheers to Willie Cochran. I think he's coming right up. Cheers, my man. Good job with this. I should call him sir. Okay, anyway, let's try this together now. And even though this is, you know, got a very high ABV, it's actually quite drinkable at bottle strength. cask strength. So that's really interesting. Now, before I put some water in, what am I tasting here? Looking at my notes. Well, it's sweet and it's dry, and there's a touch of sourness there. So it's got a lot of the flavor bases covered in that regard. What else? And there's a berry note there that that's quite interesting. I'd like to say raspberry, and that's something that I found also in that Glenfiddich bottle from review number 6. I put a note. You can read the note there on the WhiskyWhistle channel site. You can see the little note there. Anyway, again, quite smooth considering that that this is 54%. So that's really great. So what else am I tasting? Well, now I'm on to the finish, and there's a grassy sort of a mint flavor happening there. So really, really interesting. It's a little bit astringent, so it leaves your mouth feeling quite dry. Let me just try that once more neat. And some orange there and spice. Okay, let's add a little bit of water now. Not too much. I'm going to just add about 4 milliliters. Maybe just a drop more. There we go. Now, with water, I noticed that you don't get a great amount of the Scotch mist happening with Jura, and that could be because of the height of their stills, or maybe I just didn't add enough water. You know, again, not every whiskey needs the same amount of water. It depends on the whiskey itself. So this one, already being smooth and palatable at cask strength, I really wouldn't want to add a whole lot of water to that. And with water, the nose really gets a lot sweeter. So what I'm smelling here is a lot sweeter than before. And in fact, more sherry notes are coming through. Quite often in a double matured whiskey, adding water brings out the original cask, because that's the one that's had the most influence. This one, 9 years in American oak bourbon, and 8 years in sherry butts. That's a lot of time in each. So it's really just whatever happens to be dominant. So I guess the sherry inside these butts must have been quite pungent in the interaction with the spirit. Anyway, so with water, more sherry notes, dark raisins, a little more of the peat comes through, in fact, which is interesting. It really comes out to play nicely here. And still very sweet. And in the background, there's still that caramel and vanilla scent that's from the bourbon casks. Okay, let's try that with a little bit of water. It's entirely smooth now. A little bit of peat walking through there now with water. Not as dry. It's still quite sweet, and there's a bit of wood smoke coming through as well with water. It's quite astringent. Imagine chewing on grape seeds while you're eating the grape. So you get that little bit of astringency together with the sweetness. Really nice. And with water, the finish is almost the same. It's very herbal. And there's something, the finish is like the finish, the aftertaste after you've had some licorice. I don't want to say it tastes like licorice, but there's a similarity in the aftertaste between licorice and this particular whiskey. Yeah, and the peat really comes through after you let that sit for a while with a lid on. Let's try that with the same amount of water. Okay, let's see here. Oh, really big caramel now. And vanilla. Boy, oh boy. This is one you can really enjoy over, a good half hour or hour. Pour yourself a glass, let it sit, pour a new glass, see how it differs, see how it's the same. It's still the same whiskey, of course, but boy, you really get some real complexity here. And the mouth feels a little bit oilier, oddly enough. Anyway, lovely whiskey here, Jura, from Jura Distillery on the Isle of Jura in Scotland, next to Islay. Beautiful whiskey, interesting bottle, beautiful shape there. It's got a waistline, hasn't it? For marks for this one, I'm going to give it 88 out of 100. And in fact, this really gets better as you move down the bottle. Try it right off the bat, and then also just let it sit, let it breathe a little bit, and I think you'll really enjoy this whiskey a lot more. And I look forward to trying some other Jura expressions from their range. So send me a comment if you've got some questions, or if you've got some suggestions for Jura Distillery or any others. And I'd love it if you would subscribe to WhiskyWhistle here on YouTube. And for the Koreans that are watching, I've also got a Naver blog, and you can find that with the same address, WhiskyWhistle. I'm going to, I'll put that in a comment, a link to the Naver blog. It's in Korean, so you might like that. Hopefully I don't make too many mistakes. Anyway, watch for that one. And again, this is Mark from WhiskyWhistle.com. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you again very soon. Cheers, everyone, and have a great Whiskey Wednesday.